Okay, so first one obviously is, the idea of, say we're looking down a street. This is the easiest one point perspective. So basically we have a single point, and we have a horizon line associated with that point. And this horizon line is also really our eye level. So our eye level, basically the height of our eyes, we can take our brush or pencil, put it right against our eyes, and then extend our arm straight out from that, and that will give us our eye level. So what does the eye level mean? Why is it so important? Well, if we're looking down a street, we'll find that the street will converge ultimately to the eye level and to a particular vanishing point if the street is straight. So if the street isn't straight, what will happen is, say it veers in this direction, it will have a new vanishing point going off in that new direction, and say then it returns back to this point. So some, like a country road, will wander its way, and then here's maybe the lines in the road. It will wander its way through and switch vanishing points along the eye level, as long as the road is perfectly flat and horizontal. Okay, and now if the road has a hill, this is where things kind of get a little bit complicated. So say this is your eye level again. Now if this road that is going back in space, it only goes to that vanishing point. Here, let me make sure that goes to a vanishing point there. Okay, it only will go to this vanishing point as long as the road is perfectly level. What if the road is inclined? So that meaning it goes up a hill. How do you do that? Well, if it goes up a hill, depending on the degree or angle, like say in San Francisco where I used to live, it goes up a hill. Basically what it will do, it will follow a new vanishing point that's higher up than your original one. It'll be in line with your original vanishing point, but it'll have a taller plane here, and then we will never see the end of the road because it will dip onto the other side. It'll go down the other side. So we'll have buildings, on either side here. But the thing is, the buildings will not follow this inclined plane, because the buildings need to be horizontal for people want to live where the floor is not inclined, right? It's going to be flat. So basically you're going to have your buildings here, but they will follow instead this perspective line. So for instance, this door, say there's a door right here, it will follow this original eye level down here. Okay? So this is the eye level, and well, this is the vanishing point right here. So VP, vanishing point, eye level. Okay? All right, so that's something important to understand, because if we have an instance where, say we're drawing a field and there's lots of hills in that field, see it kind of zigzags back and forth, and we want to follow a road over that field. So this will have a vanishing point that's higher that it goes to up in here, even though that road will end at this part of the hill, and then we'll pick it up maybe down over here. And the same thing will happen. It'll have a vanishing point that's up here somewhere, depending on what kind of plane we're dealing with, and then it'll vanish on the other side of the hill, and then we'll pick it up again here. Okay? So this is an instance where the intellectual understanding of what happens to a vanishing point when we have varied planes is really important. I think the problem is we have people that, or when I say linear perspective, you just think, oh yeah, I get it, 1-point perspective, all the lines converge into 1 point. Well, nature is a lot more complex than that, and I've just given you, 2 examples of where that is the case. And so it's important when you're analyzing a scene to see, how things are getting thinner, like a road, and smaller as it goes back in space. Okay, so that's just simply, kind of encapsulates 1-point perspective. Now let's go into 2-point perspective. Okay, with 2-point perspective, instead of looking straight down the street, we are looking more at the corner, like the corner of a building. And so what we're going to have instead are 2 different vanishing points. And so depending on where our eye level is, say our eye level is right in here, we'll have vanishing points that will come. So there's vanishing point 1 and point 2. There's our eye level, right? So instead of one in the center, we're going to have these vanishing points. Now, this is probably, could be a little bit more common than the single vanishing point. So one advantage that we have when we're composing with a single vanishing point is the vanishing point is going to be inside the canvas, and there's going to be a lot of indications to lead the eye into maybe a focal point. Often I like to put a focal point or an area that that just leads you right, or that's somewhere near the vanishing point, and that it's an easy way to compose looking straight down the street. Now with something where you have vanishing angles going off in 2 different directions, and usually your canvas, the thing that makes this so challenging is your canvas is very often not going to include either one of these vanishing points. And so either you're going to have to either just eyeball it, right? Here you can actually measure it for the most part in 1 point. But in 2-point perspective, you have to just, for the most part, measure the angles and just try and get it as accurate as you can. But a way to do that is just to really pay attention to where the horizon line is, so that you know that the lines underneath it are going to go up and the lines above it are going to go down, and that will really help you make better decisions. There's another way that you can actually build a grid if you wanted to, but for most part, for plein air painting, you're just going to eyeball it for the most part. What I recommend is doing some of these 2-point perspective scenarios in order to get a better familiarity of how these angles work. So one thing you're going to have happen, you'll notice, is that on a typical scene, maybe if you see more of this side of a building than this opposite side, what's going to happen is the vanishing point is going to be further away from the canvas on this broader side than it is here. And what does that mean? It means that the angle on this side of the building is going to be less steep than the angle on this side. It'll be more steep if you have a part of the building that's more foreshortened. So that's something that you really need to look out for. Otherwise, the building will kind of look funky and kind of flatten out if you had a line going out in this direction. If you had one accurate and then one going out, it could be really problematic. One of the ways to correct perspective, you can, again, flip the image to check your perspective to see if it's right, and it could be a very useful tool for you. Now, the other thing you can use perspective for is not just buildings, but say you did a tree, and this happens quite a bit, where you're going to have to deal with 2-point perspective when you have to deal with shadows. So say we have this tree here, just proverbial lollipop tree. Then you got the sun lighting it from this direction. Well, if the direction, and I'm going to put kind of a three-dimensional arrow, meaning that it's slightly behind us going. So it basically, to some degree, side lighting this tree, and then it's casting this shadow. The shadow isn't going to be straight across because it's not side lit. So let me draw that real quick. Side lit tree. Say it's a perfectly side lit tree. It's half shadow, half light. Then we'll have a shadow that's kind of, just comes right off of it, and it's almost just flat, right? We don't have to deal with a lot of perspective there. But more often than not, we're going to have sun coming at an angle, and so we need to think about how this shape is going to work. One thing we're going to see is if this is a flat lying plane, it's going to compress this circular shape into more of an oval shape. Because if we square it off in two-point perspective, where we have these lines converge to a vanishing point, and these lines converge to a vanishing point right here, we're going to have to make it that shape. And so I see a lot of people that say they understand perspective when it comes to throwing a shadow in, something as simple as that. I can see it's not quite working. So that's why I say really pay attention and take some time to really learn how perspective works, because you are not going to get away from it no matter what you do. It's a part of the process of making a believable space. Okay, now we're going to work on a three-point perspective, and you might say, well, when am I going to use that? Well, there are certain scenes that you could only do if you have a knowledge of three-point perspective, and those are usually very large subjects or large spaces. So for instance, if you wanted to look up towards a stand of trees, or skyscrapers, if you're having an aerial view, you're up on a mountain looking down into a valley, that's where three-point perspective can really be useful. So how does three-point perspective work? Well, we've got we've got our two-point perspective box. So we've got our horizon line right here, vanishing points here and here, right? Well, what's the difference with three-point perspectives? Well, we've got either we're looking up at something or we're looking down on something, and something that is very large enough that we actually really notice that perspective. Now, even on a regular building like this, there will be some three-point perspective, and what that means is that say we're drawing here, and our eye view, we're across the street and looking up at maybe a 10-story building, say. Well, typically we'll draw that 10-story building with straight vertical lines. But what's really going on is very slightly you're going to actually have these lines converge, start to converge a little bit as they go up higher. And it's going to be so slight if the building's not that tall that you may not notice it. And so very often we just teach that, just make those straight. It's just easier. So that's where, but I think there's lots of opportunities that open up to the artist who's willing to deal with three-point perspective. And so basically we have our eye level here, and then something that's way above our eye level, maybe up here, and instead of going just vertical sides of the building, those sides of the building are going to go in up at an angle, and then we get these really kind of dramatic views. And this is below our eye level, so we go down here, and then we've got this very large, massive shape. So one thing this can do is we can exaggerate some things by putting a slight angle into them. So if we want a tree or a building to feel really tall, by putting a little 3-point perspective in, we can just add that dramatic view. Movies do it all the time, and concept artists, movie artists, when I do more imaginative work, I use it quite a bit because it helps things feel larger. And so it's something not to fully dismiss as a landscape painter, or it's something that I think you should know something about, because it can be of quite a bit of use. So one area where it can be used is even as a landscape painter, if you're dealing with mountains, as you get these really tall, jagged peaks, you realize that some of these lines, whether internally or on the edges of the peak, they always feel like they converge at a sharp angle. Well, part of the reason why they converge is just because they're so high. And so 3-point perspective is influencing the shape of those peaks. If you got a lot closer to them, they might feel a little bit more blunt or stunted, but they kind of come up to a little bit sharper point depending on our vantage point. So being aware of that, does that make you paint differently? I would say absolutely. It can be an extra tool in your arsenal to separate yourself from other artists by a knowledge of this perspective.